All right. You're starting to take steps. You're starting to take action, really building on that self-worth and that self-esteem. And, it's been a week, 2 weeks of that consistent action. And then all of a sudden you hit that snooze alarm and you don't get up. Maybe you snap in a conversation. Maybe you isolate a little bit more. Maybe you're a little cold to your loved ones. Whatever it is, what is going on? What is underneath that sabotage that stops us? And how do we get over that and move through it such that it doesn't hold us back? Let's get into it. Here we are with the 12th episode of Ember in the Dark. I am your host, Mike Warren. And, I want to thank you for tuning in. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that kind of that sabotage piece that, when we get committed, when we get consistent with action and, we wake up, today's the day I'm going to do the thing and we get it done. And as 2, 3, 4, maybe a week, maybe a month, and also we start to slip. What's going on? And so a little bit of piggybacking off of the last episode with the self-worth, self-esteem, my experience in this realm is we typically are not able to hold ourselves up to a standard. And so what happens is, we get committed. Yes, we get excited. Yes, we attempt to go for the thing. What happens is when we slip up, we either go to a place of complete self-destruction mode, of self-beat up, like we messed up, there's no point anymore, what the heck, just done with it, don't care. Or we go to other spaces, maybe of avoidance, where we don't bring it up and we don't want to talk about it and we just kind of sweep it under the rug, right? And I want you to think about this with other people. Right? If someone said they were going to meet you at a certain time and you're at that place and they don't show up, it's kind of odd. There's some awkwardness, especially if the next time you see them, they don't really bring it up. They act like nothing has ever happened. Well, it's also true for ourselves, right? And so this sabotaging process is a form of self-beat up. It's another tool in the tool belt that we use to emotionally or mentally harm ourselves because the self-worth isn't there. And a great way I like to kind of acknowledge this when I'm working with people is, if we're looking as a sports analogy and you're looking at the statistics of a sports team, one is in a season, how many wins, how many losses, U's and L's, okay? And so if we take those same letters, W's and L's, wins, however, the L not being losses, and just changing it to lessons. Okay, that's one of the most powerful tools that I've used for myself as well as with people that I'm working with, because it takes the weight off of things that we said we were going to do, didn't follow through. What is the lesson there? Or we attempted something and we didn't get the desired result. What is the lesson there that I can learn from to grow such that my next kick at the cat, I'm able to create the result or get the desired experience that I'm looking for? Right? However, when we are operating from a place that has lower self-esteem, lower self-worth, we got to look for these, I guess you could say, choices that are typically unconscious that are going to throw wrenches in our gears, that are going to sabotage ourselves. A good example is, you have a weight goal, whether to gain or release some weight, and you have a eating regimen to follow, and midnight rolls around, your stomach grumbles, and you're like, I'm going to go into the fridge and I'm going to take a piece of that cheesecake. And you have that cheesecake and it feels so good. It's awesome in the moment. Oh yeah, this is delicious. And the moment you are done, I know this, I'm speaking for myself here. However, if it resonates for you, you'll know it's kind of like I go to a place of, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, why did I do that? I said I wasn't going to do this anymore. And here I am doing it again. Well, there's no point in continuing with this regimen because I messed it all up. And so it's kind of like hitting a big red destruct button when we have these little moments of slip ups, even more so with individuals that have a self-worth or self-esteem challenge in the belief in oneself. It's kind of like hit the big red button and kind of like game over. There's no point in continuing, right? Well, what we're going to talk about is that it's okay. And there is a process to begin to navigate this such that it doesn't affect you the same. And so I had asked a mentor of mine, what is some tools to support the self-worth, to support the self-esteem? And one of the ones that had come up in the conversation was, the first and foremost one is forgiveness. And I'll talk a little bit more of this in another episode in regards to specifically around the forgiveness piece. However, it's got to be forgiveness. There has to be a part of you that at some point says enough is enough. I saw a quote online. There are a dime a dozen nowadays. However, I saw a quote online that was talking about, in a spiritual context, however, it's talking about the regret for the choices we've made that maybe didn't support us and we feel not aligned with. Now we look back and we're like, man, I made a big mistake there. And what it was, this quote, I don't know word for word, however, what it was insinuating was regret is like a form of self-crucifixion. It's a form of, the word is slipping my mind here. It's a form of penance, I guess is the word. It's a form of paying penance, but does not bear any fruit. So when we look back at the choices we made, maybe some of you out there are experiencing things with addictions. And I know I have friends that have worked through that and they've shared their stories with me. And, when they look back at their life, the moment that things shifted for them was when they were able to accept and forgive those choices. However, up until that point, they would look back at all of those moments where they gave into those addictions, and there was a heavy, heavy level of regret and shame around those pieces. Right. And so this is what we do to ourselves, especially if the self-worth is low, the self-esteem is low. This is what we do to ourselves because we feel that we deserve to pay that penance, to pay that price of beating ourselves up with shame, guilt, regret. We feel like, I'm using the word we. I just want to be clear here. If this does not resonate, you don't have to take it on. Everything I'm speaking is always from my own experience. So from my experience, when I read that quote, that us playing the regret, the shame, the guilt over and over and over, it's kind of like we're doing it from a place because we feel like we deserve it. And by beating ourselves up is a way to show that we're sorry for those choices. Does that make sense? When I heard that, I was like, that's exactly why I keep playing it over and over again, is the fact that I feel like I need to do that to myself to make up for the choices that I made or did not make. And what I started to recognize once I read that quote, it's like, it's an excuse to not move forward. Think about that. It's an excuse to not actually move forward. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. An individual who, let's say, wasn't showing up in their family. whether as a mother, as a father, brother, sister, son, daughter, doesn't matter. And there's an event or some situation that happened within the family dynamic that they're looking back and they're carrying some shame, guilt, regret over. And they keep playing that over to play that penance, to keep that weight going, because that individual feels as though they messed up big. And so they keep playing that story over and over and over again to keep that penance going. Yet, if you just objectively look back, what are the chances of that individual actually taking action to make a difference, to enact change? It is literally a waste of energy. Now, I'm not saying that you just never do it, because in that space, there is value in there. There are lessons to be learned. Going into the darkness, there are lessons in there to extract. However, going in there, sitting in there, wallowing in there, and not moving, doesn't matter how many lessons you extract, nothing's going to change. And so by operating this way, a form of sabotaging ourselves, by operating this way, it keeps us from moving forward. Yes, we feel like we're paying our price. Yes, we feel like we are giving ourselves what we deserve. We messed up this way such that now I got to treat myself this way. But if you really want to come from a place of, we'll use the word repentance. By no means am I associating this in the terms of religious context. However, just a form of repentance. Well, what that would actually look like is, okay, here's a choice I made in the past. It didn't work out the way I wanted to. I see it as a mistake or as an error. Do I feel shameful, regretful, guilty about it? Yes, no, maybe. And you might have sat there for a while. However, at some point you're like, because of this thing, I am going to choose different moving forward. However, you won't be able to do that until you let that go. However, can you see how it holds you in a stuck pattern? So if you're feeling those stuck, like you feel like you're looping your stories, your experiences, your emotions, it's kind of like they're just going around and around and around. Chances are you are holding on to the story and the emotions of past choices and not forgiving and accepting fully such that you can let it go and choose different moving forward. I'm going to suggest that's a possibility. And I didn't see it that way until I came across that quote, because I literally been feeling like I was meant to feel guilty, to feel shameful, to feel regretful because of the story that I had messed up so bad. However, what has been supporting me is getting outward focused, moving in my life, taking action on things. And it's not a big shift. Like I said in the last video, it's 1 degree shifts, or the last episode. It's those 1 degree shifts that I start to get a little bit more breathing room. And yes, I'll go back and fall into that space and it happens again. And, and it's just being okay with it such that I can keep moving forward. Because that's, in my mind, if you want to apply this to a religious context, the repentance piece, if we're going to talk about the creator, source, God, all of that, whatever it is for you, that would be the ultimate form of true repentance. Is I've done this in the past and I've learned from it such that I'm doing something different moving forward. And that goes back to my friends that I had mentioned earlier who have been addicted to certain substances, and they have transformed their life. A specific individual, it's like a completely new person. completely new, right? And the journey that this individual shared with me was there was a turning point where it was like, enough is enough. I cannot sit here and beat myself up and wallow in this for these past choices, because that is a form of sabotaging any forward movement. It keeps you stuck. And this individual had to start from where they were at and rebuild themselves. They didn't have a license, didn't have a car, weren't allowed to see the kids. Like, they had to take steps. And in that space, it feels like negative, like, not ground zero or level one. It was like -10. And they just took those daily consistent actions from those spaces to rebuild themselves. Again, going back to the void, going back to the self-worth episodes. Yet if we keep holding on to and playing these things out, it's a form of revenge. Somewhere along the way, we feel like we've messed up. Right? Again, if this resonates, it resonates. If not, it's all good. Those pieces of ourselves that we feel like we've made wrong choices, there's a form of us that does not agree, does not like, does not accept. And so what we do is we go to a form of revenge on ourselves. And what that looks like is the negative self-talk, the negative or the self-hate, not doing the things we say we want to do that will support us a week from now, a month from now, years from now. It keeps us stuck reliving in that past experience. And so this is what that sabotaging looks like. It's a form of revenge to keep you stuck where you are. And so next episode, I'm going to start talking about, like, how do we get out of that? How do we shift that energy such that we can begin taking those steps moving forward? So I do want to thank you for tuning in, listening, watching, and a reminder, you can find this episode or any of the episodes of Ember in the Dark on all your major platforms, your Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and if you are finding value in these episodes, and you maybe know somebody else out there, feel free to share, comment, like, interact, help get this message out there. My intention is just to support people that are going through those challenging times. As I always say, no matter how dark it gets, even the smallest of embers can light your path. And my hope is this podcast is that ember for you or maybe somebody else that you know. So again, thanks for tuning in, listening. It's a pleasure of mine, and I wish you the best for today. Have a good one.